I'm slightly handicapped this evening. Well, I don't have my wife for a start, and you know how much I rely upon her. Hence I come amongst you unmade up, so I hope I'm not startling you too much. Secondly, there is the distinct possibility I'll have to run off and vote in the House of Commons on the finance bill, otherwise known as the budget. I'll try and miss it and keep on talking to you, but you may hear a division bell ringing, so don't be startled by that either. As you'll have guessed, I'm in the Houses of Parliament right now. I was just saying to the Prime Minister, well, twice actually. I spoke to him on Monday and I spoke to him again this afternoon at Prime Minister's question. Neither exchange was particularly satisfactory. I asked him why he had not found any word, not a single word, to condemn the Israeli attack on the Iranian embassy in Damascus, which was, after all, the proximate reason for the extraordinary events of last weekend, where hundreds of drones, which were never intended to reach their target, were known to be certain to be shot down by the Iron Dome, by British and American and even Jordanian ordnance before they reached their target, but 8 ballistic missiles which were guaranteed to reach their target and did. Lucky for Israel, that target was a military base, but it could easily have been the billionaire's villa in Tel Aviv, underground which Netanyahu was skulking like a rat, leaving his people to face the music that he had invited into their homes. When I asked Rishi Sunak why he had not found one word to condemn a brazen breach of international law, of the Vienna Conventions, which make inviolable diplomatic property in all countries, for every country, all he could say was, whatever happened in Damascus, the Iranian response was completely over-egged, that it was disproportionate. Well, what did happen in Damascus? The State of Israel, using American-supplied weapons and aircraft, launched missiles at the consulate of the Iranian embassy, sovereign property of Iran, just the same as if you dropped a bomb on Iran itself. It killed 10 people, at least 10 people, some of them Iranian generals, others Iranian diplomats, others Syrian workers, local workers in the embassy. It was an act of mass murder. If you came upon someone who'd gone into a building and murdered 10 people, you'd call that mass murder. And when you add the diplomatic impact of making such an attack on another country's embassy, well, you have a crisis, one that they are not prepared to talk about, for the most part, in Western media or in Western politics. It was obviously going to ensure an Iranian response. It was intended to bring forth an Iranian response because Netanyahu wants a war with Iran, because he hoped that Britain and the United States would join that war alongside him, thus extending his tenure as Prime Minister of Israel. The only way to extend it, the only way for Netanyahu to stay out of prison. Now, Joe Biden and Rishi Sunak, he told me in Parliament, was cautioning restraint, asking Israel not to retaliate to Iran's retaliation. But then David Cameron flew to Tel Aviv and met with Netanyahu today and has declared that Israel is going to launch a retaliation inside Iran and that Britain will support it. Thus, I've got to put it this way, we have the beginnings of all-out war. We have Israel, the United Kingdom, and the United States openly saying that they're going to be involved in an attack on the Islamic Republic of Iran. Russia and China and Iran will be up against them. Russia and China have made it absolutely clear that they support the Iranian action last weekend over Israel, and they will defend Iran if Israel attacks it with Western support. I don't know what you call that. I call that World War III. I call Iran, Russia, and China on one side, Israel, the UK, and the US on the other side. I call that World War III, because everybody knows that the Iranian attack on Israel will be 10 times greater than the one they launched last weekend. And it will not be telegraphed 5, 10, 15 days in advance. It won't be telegraphed 15 minutes in advance. And it will involve far more deadly missiles than were fired last weekend. It will involve weapons that Iran has never used before, and that nobody in the West knows the true nature and character of, because unlike most countries, Iran makes all of its own armaments. And judging by the demand for them, they're pretty effective at that. And yet, it is utterly remarkable that Western politicians are not only speaking of other things, but are speaking of anything but this impending World War III. I'm not sure if they've even given up the manufacturing of consent. They're just giving their green light to Netanyahu to launch what will become World War III. They're not even seeking to persuade people of the correctness of their action. An unelected Prime Minister has gotten an unelected Foreign Secretary who was ennobled by the unelected head of the British state, who went to Tel Aviv to give his green light to the forthcoming war. If nobody else sees the gigantic chasm of a democratic deficit that represents, well, I'm not sure that they are fit to be running our affairs. So when I asked Sunak this afternoon, I spoke twice this afternoon in Parliament, both times about Gaza, something of a parliamentary record, I'm told. When I asked him this morning, you said you were asking Netanyahu for restraint. What are you going to do if he rejects your advice and launches an unrestrained attack on Iran? Answer came there, none, not even an attempt at an answer. They're just going to do it. That means they're putting your children, your house, your life on the line without even a by your leave, without even a vote in this puppet parliament, the outcome of which will be guaranteed, but they will not even allow that. At Prime Minister's questions today, not one person raised this crisis except me. Not one out of 650. There they were with their student union japes, laughing across the aisle at each other, talking about anything, everything, but the fact that by the weekend we could be in an all-out war. They were talking about Liz Truss's memoir, which will be remaindered in all good bookshops for 99 pence by the end of the month. Nobody in their right mind wants to read the memoir of someone who was Prime Minister for 40 days, the shortest tenure of any Prime Minister in modern British history. And I've got to tell you something. I don't like to be mean, especially about women. But as I saw her speak in the House of Commons yesterday, I again marveled that such a diminutive, unprepossessing figure could possibly have ever become the Prime Minister of Britain. And I'm counting Rishi Sunak and other miserable British Prime Ministers in that ranking. There can never have been a more utterly inadequate figure ever to occupy 10 Downing Street. And there have been some Stumers in that job. But that's all they talked about this afternoon. Angela Rayner, the Labour deputy leader's tax affairs, her council house sale, Liz Truss's ruminations on her parliamentary colleagues. Not one person asked, other than me, are we going to be at war by the weekend? How's that going to go? It is truly extraordinary. The diminished, degraded nature of the British political class, and I'm certain that the American political class is no better. In fact, the only thing we don't have here, and I'm following APAC Tracker, and you should too, it is staggering. People you have never heard of, even if you're an American, people you have never heard of, receiving 500,000, 1 million, 1.5 million, Joe Biden's case, $11.1 million from the Israel lobby. Talk about bought and sold. America's interests have been completely purchased by the supporters of Israel. No wonder they're going so gung-ho into the forthcoming war. They've been paid already to do so. And Israel has the receipts. They can do no other but to stand for and with Israel, even if it harms irreparably the national interests of the United States of America. Now, other European countries are not quite so stupid as ours, whereas you might think that Britain, as the author of the entire Palestinian tragedy, disaster, Nakba, catastrophe, would feel some historical obligation to actually try and steer some kind of balanced course in the events unfolding in the Middle East. The opposite is true. Britain, the colonial power that founded the state of Israel, is backing its own creation, a country with 3 million people of fighting age, against another of its colonial possessions, namely the now Islamic Republic of Iran. When I raised this in the House of Commons this week, there were all kinds of bemused looks, partly because most of them looked to be about 19 years old, on the Labour benches in particular. When I said, do you think the Iranians are listening to you? You who occupied their country, who looted their wealth, and who overthrew their one ever democratic socialist prime minister elected by the people in a democratic election. Britain overthrew them. In my lifetime, well, it was in 1953. I was inside my mother's tummy when it happened, but I was still alive when this happened. It's not ancient history, but nobody knew it. And nobody understood that with a history like that, in modern times, why would Iran listen to little Rishi Sunak, the shoeshine boy of the American empire, on these matters? But the die is cast. David Cameron, close friend of a pig, was the man chosen to announce Britain's participation in what may become a third world war. It is truly amazing that we have reached this stage, not even sleepwalking, but in some kind of political coma. First over Ukraine, and now in defense of Israel, with its 3 million people of fighting age, against a country, Iran, with 41 million people of fighting age. with a fleet of ballistic hypersonic missiles of a standard of the big superpowers, that we ended up where we are. Who do you think is going to be doing Israel's fighting for it? Israel could not have repelled even the deliberately disabled Iranian effort over their skies, over their territory last weekend. It needed British jets. It needed American firepower. It needed the American-supplied Iron Dome. And it needed the little king of Jordan to defend them. Imagine the Jordanian people, a great people, Bedouin Arab people, with millions of Palestinians living on their land, with 1 million or 2 Iraqis living on their land, served Israel last weekend. I don't know about you. I wouldn't put much money on the chances of the little king lasting much longer in Jordan, or the little prime minister lasting much longer in Britain, or the little president in Paris managing to see out his term, never mind be re-elected for another, or little Joe Biden, diminutive, diminished, degraded, demented, leading the American people into what might be an historic tragedy which can reach even over the Atlantic. We'll have excellent guests. Professor Marandi from the University of Tehran in the second hour, and the inimitable New Yorker Gerald Celente talking from the United States about how all this is playing out. We've got a poll running. Has Israel lost the war? Overwhelmingly, people say yes. But it turns out, actually, that the war has only just begun. Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be the mother of all talk shows.